Officer seen kneeling on Floyd's neck during a fatal arrest captured on video seen around the world. During that confrontation, Floyd's heart stopped and sparked a national reckoning on race and policing.
And this video that we're looking at right here is a scene in downtown Minneapolis where a group is gathering as we all await the verdict for Derek Chauvin. Now, Chauvin is facing 3 charges: second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter.
Now, Chauvin also faces second-degree murder. That in Minnesota is known as felony murder. Prosecutors had to prove the killing occurred while the defendant, Derek Chauvin, committed another felony crime. And in that case, or this case rather, that's third-degree assault. Prosecutors did not have to prove murderous intent, and this penalty can carry up to a 40-year prison sentence.
A lesser degree, there is the third-degree murder charge. Prosecutors had to prove death came due to actions that were imminently dangerous. Actions were carried out with reckless disregard for and conscious indifference to the loss of life. This charge could result in up to 25 years in prison.
And finally, Derek Chauvin also faced second-degree manslaughter. Prosecutors here had to prove death occurred due to culpable negligence. Now, that negligence would have had to create an unreasonable risk and consciously take the chance of causing death or great bodily harm to another person. The death, my apologies, the penalty there could result up to 10 years in prison.
Well, ahead of the verdict, President Biden is speaking with the family of George Floyd, who he says he's come to know, and he says, quote, he can only imagine the pressure and the anxiety George Floyd's family is feeling. Take a look.
They're a good family, and they're calling for peace and tranquility, no matter what that verdict is. I'm praying the verdict is the right verdict, which is, I think it's overwhelming in my view. I wouldn't say that unless the jury was sequestered now, not hear me say that. But so we just talked to them. I want to know how they were doing.
And the president was supposed to deliver remarks on infrastructure today after he virtually toured an electric battery facility. But those remarks have been canceled for now because of this verdict that will be coming down any minute now. The White House didn't say when the remarks would be rescheduled, but we'll certainly update you on those. Well, the president's comments come in the wake of a firestorm over remarks from Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California. On the ground in Minneapolis this weekend, Waters demanded protesters, quote, get more confrontational, depending on the jury's verdict. Well, last night, the judge in the case rebuked her comments and acknowledged that her words could lead to an appeal. Today on the House floor, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy introduced a resolution to censure Congresswoman Waters. And
going back and referring to that video there that you're seeing, the aerial footage that I believe is right across the street from the Hennepin County Government Center, the city and the nation really is on edge, bracing for the impact of the verdict and the potential fallout. 3,000 National Guard troops called on duty to help secure the city. That is in addition to police officers, sheriffs, deputies, and state police trying to make sure that the violence and the protests and the riots that we saw in the wake of George Floyd's death and that video that went viral last year, trying to prevent similar scenarios. Even here in Washington, D.C., there are buildings that have been boarded up. Coming back to Washington, though, on the House floor today, the Chauvin trial making its mark in all aspects. House Chaplain Margaret Grund-Kibben began the day with this prayer calling for mercy for the country, forgiveness, and healing.
As a country, we are rent with acrimony, torn by our individual understandings of right and wrong, facts and feelings, and divided by a host of opinions on crime and punishment. Call us to lay all of this, as hopeless as it appears, on your judgment seat. Then lay your divine hand upon the outcome of this case and also on our compatriots' anger, thoughts of revenge, and the insatiable need to disrupt and destroy. Stay any inclinations toward violence and remind us that vengeful behavior is no more justified than the acts of those who precipitated this grief and harm and ignited our cities. Be merciful on this nation, despite how we have turned our backs on your perfect love. as you inevitably judge our response to the incidents of unrest that plague our land, forgive our iniquities and heal our brokenness.
A prayer as we await the verdict in the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin murder trial. Many people calling this the trial of the 21st century. Video in your left-hand corner there shows the courtroom where the verdict is expected to come down any minute now. The jury is comprised of 12 people. That is who is making this decision, the fate of Derek Chauvin, the former police officer. It's a diverse group of 5 men, 7 women. 4 are black, 6 are white, and 2 identify as multi-racial. And this jury, it's been sequestered for about 24 hours now. You know, I think, John, a lot of people are surprised just how quickly they reached their verdict.
That is correct, Jenna. We know that the prosecutors and the defense team did their closing arguments this week. The jury had a chance to start deliberating yesterday for about 4 hours. I'm told they went an extra hour, and then today they started about 90 minutes earlier, according to press reports. Then they were called to schedule to begin deliberation, and of a total of about 11 hours, they've come to some verdict that we're awaiting any moment now. You know, this is a case, Jenna, we were talking just before we went on the air, that has gripped the nation for almost the last year, since May 25th, 2020, the day that George Floyd died under the knee of Derek Chauvin. Of course, we've all seen that video, and then we've all seen the conversations and the protests that sparked nearly a year ago.
That's right, and the prosecution, John, leaned very heavy on that video, appealing to the common sense of jurors. The prosecution insisting George Floyd did not pose a threat to Derek Chauvin and the other officers on the scene, and also pushing the point, and I think this was really key, that this was not a case against the entire profession of police officers, but rather this one particular police officer. The defense, in the meantime, they were arguing that the entire episode, all of this, had to be taken into context, that bystanders seemed like a threat to Chauvin, and they also argued the cause of Floyd's death were drug use and heart disease. So all of these points are really up for the jury to decide.
Now, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves because we don't yet know the verdict. It's supposed to come down any moment now, and as soon as it does, we will go live straight into the county courthouse room there. But there is some discussion about this verdict and how it will kind of just reverberate around the country. As we just mentioned earlier, we talked about National Guard troops there in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, but that's also true across the country, even here in Washington, D.C., in Chicago. We should also mention the fact that the city is already on edge, not just because of the trial that has captured the attention of the nation and the world, but also because just a little over a week ago, there was another police incident that involved another young black man, 20-year-old Dante Wright, who died while trying to evade a police arrest. He was shot during a deadly traffic stop. That sparked protests as well, days of protests. So we're seeing again the reverberation of these conversations that started about policing and race, and it's all culminating to what we're about to witness today with this verdict.
Minnesota's governor, to your point, Tim Walz, is urging people in his state to stay calm. A lot of governors as well. I think we have some sound from the governor, if we can take that.
In this moment, it's our goal together, the mayors, the community organizers, people across this state, from law enforcement to ministerial associations, is to try and make sure that we strike that proper balance of making sure that the peace and stability is upheld, but that equally as important is that rage that will be on the street, regardless of what happens, is channeled into a positive way. And that positive way means change. If we don't listen to those communities in pain and those people on the streets, many of whom were arrested for speaking a fundamental truth, that we must change or we will be right back here again.
Now, a lot of people making that same theme, that same case of peaceful protest. The White House has also been weighing in on the protests, encouraging peace. Take a listen.
We continue to convey that while this country has gone through an extensive period, especially the Black community of pain, trauma, and exhaustion as we've watched these, not just the trial, but of course additional violence against their community over the past several weeks. It's important to acknowledge that and elevate that at every opportunity we have. But in terms of your question, Jonathan, we're in touch with local authorities, we're in touch with states, with governors, with mayors, and certainly, we will continue to encourage peaceful protests.
And that was White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki there. Again, you're watching the courtroom and also a crowd that's gathering outside of the courtroom in Minneapolis. So Chauvin is facing 3 charges: second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter.
Derek Chauvin, again, he's the 19-year veteran of the Minneapolis Police Department. He also faces second-degree murder. Now, in Minnesota, that is known as felony murder. Prosecutors there had to prove the killing occurred while the defendant committed another felony crime, and in this case, that's third-degree assault. Prosecutors did not have to prove murderous intent. This charge carries a penalty of up to 40 years in prison.
Then there is third-degree murder. Prosecutors had to prove death came due to actions that were imminently dangerous. Actions were carried out with reckless disregard for and conscious indifference to the loss of life. This charge could result in up to 25 years in prison.
Now, the final charge Derek Chauvin faces is second-degree manslaughter. Here is where prosecutors had to prove the death of George Floyd occurred due to what's called culpable negligence, if I can say that. That negligence created an unreasonable risk and consciously took the chance of causing death or great bodily harm to another person. This can result up to 10 years in prison. Well, again, you are seeing on the bottom of your screen to the left side the seal of the Hennepin County courtroom where the trial has been taking place for the last 20 or so days. On the right side of your screen on the bottom right, you're seeing crowds gathering in anticipation of the jury verdict, deliberating for just about 11 hours. They began late yesterday afternoon after the closing arguments between both the prosecution and the defense lawyers. Jenna, one of the things that we noted right after the closing arguments was that the defense team already hinted at appeals. They were talking about prosecutorial misconduct. They brought up the fact that Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California was saying things that were potentially harmful. And then the third thing that we talked about, again, right before coming out to the set was the fact that the jury, according to the defense, wanted the jury to be sequestered all throughout the trial so that they would have limited exposure to press coverage. It looked like we were just seeing footage of George Floyd's family awaiting the verdict.
Yeah. It really was something yesterday to see the judge weigh in on the Congresswoman's comments. I think a lot of us were surprised to see that. It was pretty just shocking. And again, I believe this is George Floyd's family that we see here who is awaiting the verdict for Derek Chauvin, the man charged kneeling on his neck when George Floyd died. But back to Maxine Waters, that really was a stunning moment, and the judge weighed in. He said that this could lead, her comments about getting more confrontational is what she said in Minneapolis over the weekend. Well, the judge says those comments could actually lead to an appeal and an overturning of the whole case. So he had strong words for her and also rebuked her for what he said was her lack of regard, a disregard for the judicial branch, a co-equal branch of government.
Jenna, I want to refer to the video that we're seeing now on the bottom right hand of our screen. That is the Cups food store, the store where George Floyd went and allegedly tried to use the $20 counterfeit bill. That, if you've been watching the trial, is famously known as the intersection of 38th and Chicago. That is the intersection where we saw video of George Floyd under the knee of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. We also saw the bystanders really, make the case for Derek Chauvin to consider, what was happening at that time last May 25th, 2020. Jenna, the other thing that we should note is that after this verdict comes down, one way or the other, and whatever the fallout is, this case is far from over. There are still other officers who were on the scene that the state of Minnesota plans to prosecute. So, you know, this case, again, even though this is about Derek Chauvin and what the family of George Floyd considers justice, we still have yet to see the full scope and the full ramifications play out.
And in the short term, we'll see how these crowds react. So far, it looks like a relatively peaceful crowd, very peaceful, in Minneapolis, right outside the store where it happened. And cities across the country, we'll see. I know in Minneapolis, they have 2,000 National Guard members there to make sure that these protests do remain peaceful. You know, one thing that did strike me is that it's even here in D.C., where we're many miles away, you'll see storefronts boarded up, people preparing for, you know, the worst and potential protests, riots that could happen, because that has been a major story of these last 12 months, and just this. These different stories and these police shootings and racial justice, a major issue of this last year.
Jenna, let's just one more time remind our viewers of what we're looking at on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. That is the intersection of Chicago and 38th, where the now infamous video that we've all seen with Derek Chauvin and George Floyd took place. On the left side of your screen is the seal of the Hennepin County Courthouse. That is the room where the case has been playing out for the last 20 days or so. The case wrapped up yesterday with closing arguments. Judge Cahill presiding. At any moment now, we are expecting the jury verdict to come down. They have been deliberating for just about 11 hours, started late yesterday afternoon after the case was formally handed over to them after the closing arguments, and then began early this morning deliberating, and have come to a verdict of some sort that we're awaiting at any moment now. As soon as we get it, we'll start to see a pullout from the seal, and you'll probably see the judge and the courtroom. The reason why the seal is zoomed in on is because the protocol is to keep the identity of the jury anonymous. Jurors will have the ability to come forward after the trial is done, but for the time being, this is a safety protocol and also just a judicial protocol of our system to keep the jurors anonymous. So that's part of the reason why you're always seeing the zoom in of the seal.
Yeah, and we should point out that this jury has been sequestered as well. So they've been in isolation for the past 24 hours or so to make their decision and to weigh in and to come up with this verdict. So the judge, he really made a case. He didn't want any outside influences, no news, you know, the Congresswoman's comments. He didn't want any of that infiltrating their decision. I did think it was interesting, John, before the closing arguments were given, the judge, he said, hope for short, plan for long. Well, it certainly seems that those who have hoped for short are getting what they want. This verdict coming very quickly, less than 24 hours after those closing arguments wrapped up.
It's really great encouragement. And, you know, one of the things that we know about sequestering juries, it tends to move the process along a little quicker just because people don't like being sequestered. You know, in these circumstances where they're sequestered, they have limited access to any information that will help be an outside influence. Of course, they're away from their families. So that could have played in on the decision. However, when you look at the case itself, the days of presenting witnesses from the prosecution, Jenna, I know that you have the numbers because you just did a report on this morning between the prosecution and the defense. The witnesses were in the 40s, but you had plenty of expert witness who really came one by one in an attempt for the prosecution to methodically show that this was warranted, the charges were warranted here. Jenna? And
it looks like we do see the judge taking his stand, so we don't have sound yet. He's preparing for this verdict to come down. We'll, of course, go to that as soon as we see action there. But that is the judge who's been presiding over this case, Judge Peter Cahill. And again, to the right hand, right next to him, and inside the courtroom, we see outside the courtroom where a large crowd has gathered.
Looks like we have sound, so we'll go straight to the Hennepin County courtroom.
All right, please be seated. Members of the jury, I understand you have a verdict. Members of the jury, I will now read the verdicts as they will appear in the permanent records of the 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota, County of Hennepin, District Court, 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota Plaintiff versus Derek Michael Chauvin, Defendant. Verdict, Count 1. Court File Number 27, CR 20-12646. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to Count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:44 p.m. Signed, juror foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 2. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 2, third-degree murder, perpetrating an eminently dangerous act, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Signed by jury foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 3. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Jury foreperson 019. Members of the jury, I'm now going to ask you individually if these are your true and correct verdicts. Please respond yes or no. Juror number 2, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 9, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 19, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 27, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 44, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 52, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 55, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 79, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 85, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 89, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 91, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 92, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Are these your verdicts, so say you one, so say you all?
Yes. Yes.
Members of the jury, I find that the verdicts as read reflect the will of the jury and will be filed accordingly. I have to thank you on behalf of the people of the state of Minnesota for not only jury service, but heavy-duty jury service. What I'm going to ask you to do now is to follow the deputy back into your usual room, and I will join you in a few minutes to answer questions and to advise you further. So, all rise for the jury.
And guilty on all charges, the former police officer Derek Chauvin charged in the murder of George Floyd and found guilty on all 3 charges brought against him.
Let's take a brief moment. I just want to make sure. It sounded like I heard audio playing, and I don't want to talk over anything if we're hearing anything in the courtroom. Can we get confirmation of that? Okay, well, let's briefly explain what just happened. You had the jury foreman announce guilty on all 3 charges Derek Chauvin faced. On the left side of your screen, you may have seen people outside of the courthouse reacting to the jury's verdict. Now on the bottom right hand of your screen, it is my understanding that what we're looking at is the brother of George Floyd in Houston. Local affiliate is showing his family reacting to the news of Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer, now guilty of all 3 charges that he faced. We are now entering what would be considered the sentencing phase of the trial. Derek Chauvin now being escorted in handcuffs outside of the courtroom.
You know, when the verdict came down, we did see very little emotion from Chauvin. He had a mask on, but very little emotion. You can imagine how he's feeling. Guilty on all 3 charges brought against him. Second-degree murder, guilty. Third-degree murder, guilty. Second-degree manslaughter, guilty.
You know, one of the things that we were talking about even leading up to coming into the studio was the fact that the jury came back and was able to deliberate and come with a verdict so quickly did not forebode well. And I think at the end of the day, regardless of, you know, where people stand, I think what we're seeing, at least for the family of George Floyd, there's relief and perhaps, you know, understatement of the year, but for that family, a sense of justice. What we can only hope and pray for now is a sense of calm and peace that we heard people saying from the governor of Minnesota to President Biden and from the White House. That is the prayer I think most all of us have now going forward.
And as we mentioned earlier in our coverage, the president is expected to give remarks on this. He was supposed to give comments earlier today about infrastructure, those canceled. He will weigh in on this case, and so we'll bring you that as that happens. But this is not over. This is kind of just the beginning in many ways, John, as we watch this case continue and possibly see an appeal.
That is true. We're just going to have to wait and see how the rest of this plays out. But for now, that's going to do it for this live special coverage. We're going to return you back to regular programming.
You've been watching special live coverage from the CBN News Channel. We now return you to scheduled programming already in progress.